You think I don't belong here? Ma'am, you gotta think twice." The cabin went silent as Steve Harvey's deep voice echoed through first class. The hum of the engines filled the cabin of American Royal Airlines Flight 777, preparing to depart from JFK Airport, bound for Los Angeles. First class was nearly full, a curated lounge in the sky with polished mahogany trays, champagne already bubbling in crystal glasses, and passengers who looked like they hadn't carried their own bags in decades. But the moment the man in the bright burnt orange suit stepped into the aisle, everything changed. "Excuse me, ma'am," he said in that unmistakable booming voice. It wasn't angry, but it wasn't meek either. It was the kind of voice that had hosted shows, commanded stages, and made millions laugh, a voice recognized by nearly everyone in America. It was Steve Harvey. He stood tall in the narrow aisle, his hand resting on the leather seat in front of him. The boarding pass in his hand was slightly bent from the rush through TSA, but the number on it was clear as day, 2A. And yet, sitting in his seat, legs crossed, sunglasses perched arrogantly on her nose, like she was in the front row of a Paris runway, was a blonde woman in a black designer coat. "Seat 2A," Steve said again, lowering his voice but sharpening the edge. "That's my seat." The woman didn't even look up at first. Her diamond-studded fingers kept scrolling through her phone, the glow of Beverly Hills real estate listings reflecting off her oversized glasses. She finally sighed and tilted her head up, eyes filled with the kind of polished disdain that came from old money and zero humility. "Oh, I think you're mistaken," she said smoothly. "This is my seat, and I'm not moving. Surely you can find another one. Get lost." Gasps rippled quietly through first class. Some passengers lowered their eyes, pretending not to hear. Others craned their necks, fascinated. Nobody wanted to get involved, but nobody could look away either. Steve chuckled under his breath, that deep rumble familiar from years of television, but this time it wasn't playful. "Lady, listen, ain't no mistake. I know what this ticket says. 2A, my seat." He held it up, crisp against the soft lighting of the cabin. She waved dismissively, her bracelets clinking. "I'm a Diamond Elite member with American Royal. I requested this specific seat. I've been flying this airline for years. I'm sure you'll understand if they move you somewhere else. Maybe back there." Her manicured finger pointed vaguely toward economy, as if the thought alone gave her hives. Steve's smile faded. His mustache twitched the way it did whenever somebody on Family Feud gave a ridiculous answer. But this wasn't funny. "Back there?" he repeated, his voice a low rumble now. "Ma'am, I didn't come all this way to play musical chairs with my boarding pass. This is mine." The tension thickened. A few passengers had already started whispering, recognizing the man in the orange suit. Some pulled out their phones, recording discreetly. Still, the woman, later identified as Catherine Whitmore, a Manhattan real estate mogul who had spent her life believing she was untouchable, leaned back in the leather seat, smug and unbothered. "You don't look like a first-class passenger," she said coldly. "Not dressed like that. Bright orange, really? This isn't a comedy show. This is first class." And there it was, the strike of arrogance that wasn't about color on a suit, but color on a man. Steve's eyes narrowed. He'd heard it all before in subtler words, in whispered tones, in polite excuses. But tonight he was tired, worn down from back-to-back meetings with Hollywood executives. He had spent his life grinding, hustling, building an empire, from stand-up stages to TV studios, from business ventures to philanthropic projects. And now, on the very airline he partly owned through his investment company, he was being told he didn't belong in the seat he had paid for. He took a deep breath. His booming voice carried so every soul in that cabin could hear. "Ma'am, this is my seat. Ain't no debate, no discussion, no deal we can work out. I'm going to sit here. Now I'm asking you nicely one last time. Move." Her lips curled in a smirk. "And I'm telling you, no. People like me don't get moved. People like me get what we want. And people like you—" She trailed off, eyes scanning his suit with disdain. "Should learn their place." Gasps again, louder this time. A woman in the third row shook her head. A man whispered, "Did she really just say that?" Steve's jaw tightened. The cameras were catching it now, every glare, every twitch of his mustache. His hand tapped the headrest, steadying himself. Inside his chest, the old anger stirred. But unlike younger days, when he might have let it burst, Steve had learned to master it. Years of being underestimated, challenged, or doubted had given him a calm weapon. Patience sharpened into precision. He leaned forward just slightly, his mustache nearly brushing Catherine's sunglasses. "Lady," he said, voice deep as thunder, "you don't know who you just messed with." The entire cabin fell silent. Even the flight attendants froze mid-step. And with that, the spark of a confrontation that would go viral worldwide had been lit. The tension inside American Royal Airlines Flight 707 could be sliced with a butter knife. Every passenger in first class was frozen, caught between fascination and discomfort, watching a drama unfold that was more gripping than any in-flight entertainment. Steve Harvey remained standing in the aisle, his bright orange suit glowing against the blue leather of the first-class seats. He wasn't raising his voice. He didn't have to. His presence alone filled the space, commanding attention like it always did. But Catherine Whitmore wasn't budging. She leaned back, crossed her legs, and smirked like a queen defending her throne. "I told you, sir," she said coolly, emphasizing the word sir like it was an insult. "This is my seat. I booked it, I requested it, and I'm already settled in. Now please, stop making a scene. People like you shouldn't draw this kind of attention in first class." A murmur ran through the cabin. A man 2 rows back whispered to his wife, "Did she just say people like you?" Steve's eyebrow raised, his mustache twitching. That phrase. He'd heard it in boardrooms, in negotiations, even in Hollywood. People like you. Always a dagger wrapped in velvet. He exhaled slowly. "Ma'am, let me tell you something. Folks have been telling me where I don't belong my whole life, and every single time I proved 'em wrong. This ain't gonna be no different." Before Catherine could retort, the soft ding of a call button echoed overhead. She had pressed the attendant button, her manicured finger resting smugly on the plastic. Within moments, a young flight attendant appeared. She wore the crisp navy blue uniform of American Royal, her hair pulled into a bun so tight it looked like it might snap. A polite but weary smile was plastered across her face. The kind of smile airline staff use when they've already had enough chaos for one day. "Good evening," she said warmly, though her eyes darted nervously between Steve and Catherine. "Is there a problem here?" Yes, there is, Catherine said before Steve could speak. She gestured dramatically toward him. This man is trying to take my seat. I'm a Diamond Elite member. I fly this route every month. I requested this specific seat, 2A, and I expect it to be respected. Steve didn't move. He simply handed his boarding pass to the attendant without a word. She examined it closely, frowning. The crisp black letters on the ticket left no room for doubt. Seat 2A, Harvey, Steve. The attendant's polite smile flickered, her eyes shifting to Catherine. Ma'am, it appears this seat is assigned to Mr. Harvey. Catherine let out a laugh that dripped with mockery. Well, I don't care what that ticket says. I've already settled in, and I'm not moving. Surely you can accommodate him somewhere else. Perhaps an aisle seat further back. The attendant hesitated, biting her lip. Around them, the watching passengers leaned in closer, waiting. Everyone could see the crossroads, uphold fairness or appease privilege. Finally, the attendant spoke softly. Mr. Harvey, if you'll allow me, we do have another excellent seat available in row 3. Plenty of leg room, aisle access. Steve cut her off with a chuckle. It wasn't a laugh of joy, but one of disbelief. He shook his head slowly, his voice rising like a preacher's sermon. You mean to tell me I pay for this seat, I hold the boarding pass in my hand, and I'm the one who's supposed to move, to make her comfortable? The attendant swallowed, caught in the web of tension. Sir, I'm just trying to avoid conflict. Steve leaned forward slightly, his mustache bristling. Conflict? Honey, I've been avoiding conflict all my life just by swallowing my pride. But this right here, this ain't conflict, this is wrong, and I ain't moving. The air thickened. Catherine tossed her hair and scoffed. My goodness, you're dramatic. Why do you care so much about one seat? Honestly, it's embarrassing. You're making a fuss like some reality TV star. Steve's eyes locked on hers. That was the breaking point. You really don't know who you're talking to, do you? He asked quietly. Catherine's smirk faltered for just a moment, but she quickly recovered. Oh, please, I don't keep up with entertainers. A ripple of recognition spread through the cabin. A young man in row 4 muttered, That's Steve Harvey. A woman gasped, clutching her phone tighter as she began to discreetly record. The attendant blinked, suddenly recognizing the man before her. Her eyes widened slightly, but Catherine remained stubborn, either oblivious or willfully ignorant. Entertainer or not, she said coldly, this seat is mine tonight. If he wants to sit, he can sit somewhere else. That's how it works in first class. Status matters. Loyalty matters. And quite frankly, she leaned forward, lowering her voice, though everyone could hear. Appearance matters. You don't look like you belong in this seat. A hush fell over the cabin. That was it. The line she shouldn't have crossed. Steve stood taller, his voice booming now, the host's cadence echoing down the aisle. Lady, let me break it down for you. I don't just belong in this seat. I own this seat. Matter of fact, I own this whole damn plane. And you about to find out exactly what that means. Every jaw dropped. The flight attendant froze, her mouth half open. Catherine blinked, finally shaken. What? What are you talking about? Steve pulled out his phone, the sleek black screen lighting up. With a few taps, he opened an app that none of them recognized. At the top in bold gold letters was the logo, Harvey Global Enterprises. Beneath it, operational controls that only one kind of man could access. "This here," Steve said, holding up the phone so Catherine and the attendant could see, "is the executive panel for American Royal Airlines. And this right here," his finger hovered over a bright red button labeled CEO Override, "is what happens when you push me too far." The passengers gasped, eyes widening. Someone whispered, "No way. He's serious." Catherine's face paled. You're lying. There's no way." Before she could finish, the cabin intercom crackled. The captain's voice, calm but laced with confusion, filled the air. Flight 7 this is Tower Control. We've just received a directive from corporate. CEO Override engaged. You are instructed to return to the gate immediately." Every passenger turned to stare at Steve. The man in the orange suit didn't flinch. He simply slipped his phone back into his pocket and gave Catherine a look that was both pitying and triumphant. "Ma'am," he said softly, "the show just started." The cabin of American Royal Airlines Flight 777 was buzzing like a live wire. Passengers whispered, phones discreetly raised, as if they were recording a Hollywood scandal in real time. Some stared at Steve Harvey in awe, the orange suit glowing under the overhead lights, while others kept glancing nervously at Catherine Whitmore, whose smug confidence had begun to crack. For the first time since boarding, Catherine looked unsettled. Her voice wavered. You can't be serious. You don't have that kind of power. You're just—" Steve raised an eyebrow. "Just what? Say it. Say what you've been thinking since I walked down that aisle." Her lips parted, but the words caught in her throat. The arrogance she carried like perfume was starting to sour. Before she could respond, the cabin door opened, and in stepped Captain James Douglas, a tall, broad-shouldered man in his early 50s. His gray-streaked hair sat neatly beneath his cap, and his presence carried decades of authority. When the captain walked into a cabin, he was used to silence, obedience. Tonight, though, he was walking straight into a storm. "What seems to be the problem here?" his deep voice asked, calm but stern. Catherine immediately straightened in her seat, her smugness rushing back like a wave. "Captain, thank you. This man," she gestured sharply at Steve, "is trying to take my seat. I'm a Diamond Elite member. I specifically requested 2A. He's being unreasonable." Captain Douglas turned to Steve. "Sir, may I see your boarding pass?" Steve handed it over without hesitation. The captain studied it, his brow furrowing. "Mr. Harvey, this does indeed say 2A, but Mrs. Whitmore here is a valued customer with our airline. Perhaps we can find a compromise." "Compromise?" Steve interrupted, his voice booming through the cabin. "Captain, let me stop you right there. You want me to give up the seat I paid for? The seat on my ticket to make her comfortable? That's your solution?" The captain shifted uncomfortably, clearly unprepared for the heat in Steve's words. "Sir, I'm simply trying to avoid escalation. There are other excellent seats available." Steve leaned forward, his mustache twitching. "You think this is about comfort? This is about principle, about respect. 'Cause every time a situation like this happens, it's always the same story. The one with the least power is told to move, told to be flexible, told to swallow his pride so somebody else don't feel inconvenienced." Passengers nodded subtly. The truth of Steve's words was undeniable. Catherine crossed her arms, her tone dripping with venom. "Honestly, Captain, this is absurd. He's just trying to cause a scene. People like him thrive on drama. If you want my opinion—" Steve cut her off, his voice sharper now. "Lady, your opinion ain't worth the price of that fake smile you wear. You don't get to talk about people like me, not tonight." The captain raised his hands, trying to regain control. All right. Let's not let this get out of hand." But it already had, because from row 3, a confident female voice cut through the tension. "Excuse me," she said, loudly enough for everyone to hear. A woman with sleek black hair streaked with silver, a press badge clipped to her blazer, stood up. "I'm Elena Morales, senior correspondent for the Washington Post. I've been sitting here watching all of this unfold, and I want to be crystal clear. What I've seen is discrimination." The cabin erupted in murmurs. Passengers whipped their heads around. Elena raised her phone, the red recording light glowing. "This isn't about a seat anymore," she continued. "This is about a black man with a valid ticket being told to move so a wealthy white woman can stay comfortable. And, Captain, if that's American Royals policy, I'll gladly put it in tomorrow's headline." The captain's face drained of color. "Ma'am, let's not rush to conclusions." From row 5, another voice chimed in. A young Asian American woman in a hoodie, her phone angled discreetly, spoke up. "I've been live streaming this whole thing. Over 2,000 people are watching right now, and trust me, they're not siding with her." She tilted her phone so Catherine could see the flood of comments scrolling by. "Kick her off the plane." Hashtag Justice for Steve, trending now. "This is racism in real time." Catherine's face flushed red. She shot up from the seat, jabbing a finger toward the young woman. "You can't record me. I don't consent." The girl shrugged. "Public space. And I'm documenting a civil rights violation. Good luck with that." Steve folded his arms, his booming laugh cutting through Catherine's outrage. "Looks like the court of public opinion already started without you, sweetheart." Catherine sputtered. "This is outrageous. You people are making a mountain out of a molehill." The phrase hung in the air like poison gas. "You people?" The passengers gasped. Elena Morales' eyebrows shot up, her reporter's instinct already typing mental headlines. Steve's face went cold, his usual humor replaced with something sharper. "Say that again," he said softly, his voice dangerous now. Catherine stammered. I wasn't talking about race. I meant journalists and social media people." Elena smirked. "No, we all know what you meant, and I'll be quoting it word for word." The cabin buzzed with electricity now. Catherine had overplayed her hand, and everyone knew it. Steve's voice cut through the noise like a judge's gavel. "Captain Douglas, you asked for a compromise. Well, here it is. Ground this plane. We're not leaving this runway until this gets handled right." The captain's jaw dropped. "Sir, you can't just—" Steve pulled out his phone again. With a few swift taps, the sleek Harvey Global Enterprises app lit up the screen. He turned it toward the captain so everyone could see. The red letters glowed. CEO Override engaged. A split second later, the captain's radio crackled. "Flight 707, this is Tower Control. CEO Override confirmed. Return to the gate immediately." The cabin exploded into chaos. Passengers gasped. Phones shot into the air. Comments flooded live streams faster than the Wi-Fi could process. The young woman with the live stream nearly shouted, "Oh, my God, he really just grounded the plane." Catherine's mouth dropped open. What did you just do?" Steve slipped his phone back into his pocket, straightened his orange suit jacket, and looked her dead in the eye. "What I always do," he said. "I took control." The passengers erupted into applause, clapping, cheering, chanting his name. Some laughed with joy, others recorded feverishly, and a few simply sat in awe, realizing they had just witnessed a moment that was about to explode worldwide. Steve turned to the captain, his tone steady and commanding. "Take us back to the gate. We ain't going nowhere until this is fixed." And for the first time in his career, Captain Douglas realized he wasn't the most powerful man on the plane. The aircraft wheels screeched as Flight 77 turned off the taxiway, guided back toward Gate C-12 under the bright lights of JFK's terminal. Inside, the atmosphere was electric. Some passengers clapped, others whispered in disbelief, and more than a few held up their phones, live streams climbing into the tens of thousands of viewers. Steve Harvey sat tall now, finally in his rightful seat, 2A. His orange suit seemed to glow brighter than ever, like a spotlight had found him. Across from him, Catherine Whitmore sat rigid, her arms folded tightly, her face pale. Her earlier arrogance had evaporated, replaced by the unmistakable panic of a woman watching her empire of entitlement crumble. When the plane eased into the gate and the jet bridge locked into place, the cabin door swung open. Waiting outside wasn't the usual line of tired gate agents. Instead, a crowd had already gathered. Executives in suits, uniformed airport security, and most tellingly, reporters holding cameras and microphones. The first to board was Rebecca Simmons, Vice President of Operations for American Royal Airlines. Her sharp navy pantsuit and pearl necklace screamed corporate damage control. She plastered on a smile that looked more like a grimace as she stepped into the cabin. "Mr. Harvey," she began carefully, her voice warm but trembling at the edges. "On behalf of American Royal, I'd like to apologize for this misunderstanding." Steve didn't move. He simply raised an eyebrow, letting the silence hang long enough for the other passengers to lean in. Finally, he spoke, his voice low and commanding. "Misunderstanding? Lady, this wasn't no misunderstanding. This was disrespect. This was arrogance. And worst of all, this was discrimination, played out in front of everybody on this plane." The murmurs grew louder. Rebecca's cheeks flushed, but she pressed forward. "I assure you, American Royal takes these matters very seriously. We'd like to handle this privately." From row 3, Elena Morales, the Washington Post journalist, interrupted sharply. "Privately? After half the cabin has it recorded? After this young woman has been live streaming to over 50,000 people?" She gestured toward the college student, whose phone now buzzed nonstop with notifications. "No, Ms. Simmons, this isn't going to be handled privately. It's already a national story." Catherine groaned, burying her face in her hands. "This is insane. I didn't do anything wrong." Steve turned his head slowly, his mustache twitching. "Didn't do anything wrong? Lady, you took my seat. You disrespected me in front of everybody, and you threw out words like people like you was sprinkling sugar on pancakes. And now you want to sit here and pretend you innocent?" Catherine's voice cracked. "I didn't mean it like that." Steve's laugh boomed through the cabin, Not the joyful laugh America knew from Family Feud, but a sharper, colder version. That's always the excuse, ain't it? You didn't mean it, but you said it. And the truth don't care about your intentions. Passengers clapped. Some nodded vigorously. One man muttered, "Preach, Steve." Rebecca Simmons shifted nervously. "Mr. Harvey, if we could step outside to discuss—" "No," Steve cut her off. His voice rose now, filling the cabin with the cadence of a sermon. "We gon' talk right here, in front of everybody. 'Cause that's how it happened. Out in the open. So now the truth gon' live out in the open, too." Cameras flashed. The live stream counter ticked higher. The whole country was about to witness this moment. Finally, Catherine snapped. She shot up from her seat, her voice trembling with rage. "I'm not some villain. I'm Catherine Whitmore. My family built half the skyline in Manhattan. I know people in Washington, in Wall Street." Steve stood too, towering over her, his presence larger than life. "Lady, you can list every building, every bank, everybody in Washington. Don't change a thing, 'cause tonight, all that power you thought you had, it don't mean a dime, not against the truth." The applause this time was thunderous. Even the captain, standing silently near the cockpit door, looked down at his shoes in shame. Rebecca Simmons' phone buzzed frantically. She glanced at the screen, her face blanching. She whispered into her headset, but Elena Morales overheard and spoke loud enough for all to hear. #HarveyJustice is trending worldwide. CNN, Fox, MSNBC, they've all picked it up. The floodgates had opened. Steve turned back to Catherine, who now looked like she might collapse. Her makeup streaked as tears welled in her eyes. "Please," she whispered, her voice desperate. "I didn't know who you were. If I'd known—" Steve's face hardened. "And that right there is the problem. You didn't know who I was, so you thought it was safe to disrespect me. You thought it was safe to treat me like less. It ain't about knowing I'm Steve Harvey. It's about knowing I'm a man, a human, somebody who deserves the same respect you'd give anybody else sitting in this seat." The cabin fell utterly silent. Every word sank in like gospel. Catherine collapsed back into her chair, defeated. Steve adjusted his cufflinks, then looked around the cabin. His voice softened now, but carried the weight of every passenger's attention. "Let this be a lesson, y'all. Disrespect don't fly. Not at 30,000 feet, not on the ground, not nowhere. And as long as I got a voice, I'm going to make sure folks remember that." The cabin erupted again, clapping and cheering, phones raised high. Rebecca Simmons swallowed hard, realizing she was no longer controlling the narrative. The story had slipped entirely out of her hands. It belonged to Steve and to the thousands already watching live. As Steve stepped into the jet bridge, the roar of voices outside grew louder. The gate area was packed with reporters, cameras flashing like fireworks, microphones shoved forward. "Mr. Harvey, is it true you grounded your own flight?" "Steve, how do you respond to accusations of discrimination? Are you planning legal action against Catherine Whitmore?" Steve paused at the threshold, his silhouette framed in the bright lights of the terminal. He looked back once at Catherine, who sat slumped in her seat, broken by the weight of her own words. Then he turned forward, facing the cameras, the crowd, and the world. "Ladies and gentlemen," Steve said, his voice booming like the finale of a comedy set, "tonight wasn't about me. Tonight was about what happens when arrogance meets accountability. And let me tell you, accountability always wins. The crowd erupted. Flashbulbs popped. Hashtags exploded. And just like that, Steve Harvey's stand on Flight 777 had become a movement. The roar of the crowd at Gate C-12 was deafening. Reporters pushed forward, microphones angled like weapons, camera lights flashing across the terminal. Passengers who had just disembarked from other flights craned their necks, whispering in disbelief as they realized the man in the orange suit at the center of the chaos was Steve Harvey. Steve stood firm, his broad shoulders squared, his mustache twitching with the kind of gravity that usually came just before a punchline. Except this wasn't comedy. This was a reckoning. "Mr. Harvey," a CNN correspondent shouted over the noise, "is it true you grounded the flight yourself?" Steve gave a small smile, half amusement, half fire. "I didn't ground the flight. The truth did. All I did was push a button and remind some folks who's really in charge when disrespect starts flying higher than the plane." The crowd roared with laughter and applause, the kind only Steve Harvey could pull from people even in the middle of chaos. But behind the laughter was steel. Another reporter from Fox leaned forward. "Are you suggesting racial discrimination played a role in what happened tonight?" Steve's eyes hardened. He didn't flinch. "Suggesting? No, sir. I'm calling it what it was. Ain't no suggestion when a man with a paid ticket gets told to move for somebody who think they more important. Ain't no suggestion when you people comes out their mouth. That ain't suggestion, that's reality." Gasps rippled through the terminal. Catherine Whitmore, escorted off the plane by two airline staff, buried her face in her hands as cameras swarmed her. The once untouchable real estate mogul now looked like a crumbling relic of entitlement, but the spotlight never left Steve. From the back of the crowd, Elena Morales, the Washington Post journalist, pushed forward with her recorder. "Mr. Harvey, if you don't mind, what's your next step? Do you plan to file charges, sue the airline, or is this about something bigger?" Steve leaned into her mic, his voice carrying like a sermon. "This ain't about money. I got money. This ain't about revenge. Revenge don't heal nothing. This is about principle, about the kind of message we send to the next generation. If I let this slide, then tomorrow it's some other brother sitting in 2A getting told to move. And I'll be damned if I let that cycle keep spinning." The crowd erupted again, clapping, whistling, shouting his name. Inside the airline's corporate headquarters in Dallas, the executives were glued to TV screens. Twitter feeds scrolled at lightning speed. Stock analysts were already warning that American Royal Airlines could face a devastating public backlash. Rebecca Simmons, the VP who had tried to quiet Steve on the plane, looked like she hadn't slept in weeks, even though only hours had passed. "Damage control won't work," one executive muttered. "This isn't a scandal we can bury. This is a movement." Back at JFK, Steve continued, "I didn't buy into this airline just to make money. I bought in because I wanted to change it, to make it fairer, better, kinder. And tonight showed me we got a long way to go. But guess what? That's exactly what we gonna do. Starting right here, right now." The reporters leaned in closer. "What do you mean by that, Mr. Harvey?" Steve's eyes blazed. "I mean from this moment on, American Royal Airlines gonna have new policies. We gonna retrain every flight attendant, every pilot, every customer service rep. And discrimination, zero tolerance. You do it, you gone. Period. Rebecca Simmons, standing behind him, nearly choked. Mr. Harvey, we haven't. Steve held up a hand. No, don't speak. Just listen. The world don't want to hear excuses right now. They want to hear solutions, and I'm giving it to 'em. Applause thundered again, echoing through the terminal like a stadium crowd. Meanwhile, Catherine Whitmore's world unraveled. Reporters surrounded her, their questions sharp as daggers. Catherine, do you regret your comments? Were you aware Steve Harvey is a partial owner of the airline? Do you think your words tonight will end your career? She snapped, her voice shrill and desperate. I didn't do anything wrong. This is all being blown out of proportion. But the cameras didn't care about her protests. The live streams didn't care. The truth had already outpaced her excuses. Back at the press huddle, Elena Morales asked again, her pen racing across her notepad. Mr. Harvey, are you saying this incident will lead to permanent reform in the airline industry? Steve smiled now, but it wasn't his TV show smile. It was sharper, heavier. You better believe it, he said. Tonight wasn't just a moment. It was a warning. To every company, every person, every institution that think disrespect is just part of the game. Your game is up. This is bigger than a seat, bigger than a flight. This is about dignity. And from now on, dignity flies first class. The words landed like thunder. Phones buzzed non-stop as clips spread across the globe. Within minutes, Steve's speech was on every major news outlet, translated into half a dozen languages, reshared across platforms. And as the crowd cheered, Steve Harvey did what he always did best, turned pain into power, conflict into comedy, laced with truth, and one man's seat into the seat of justice. By midnight, major outlets were already calling it the Flight 777 incident. Pundits debated, activists rallied, CEOs whispered nervously in their boardrooms. But the one thing everyone agreed on was this: Steve Harvey had changed the conversation. Catherine Whitmore, escorted away under heavy guard, became the symbol of entitlement's downfall. Steve Harvey, standing tall at the gate, became the voice of accountability, and the world had just witnessed the beginning of something much bigger than a flight delay. Because Steve wasn't done yet. By dawn, the world was already awake to the story of Flight 777. Overnight, every news channel looped the same clips. Steve Harvey standing tall in his orange suit, Catherine Whitmore melting down in 2A, the captain's stunned silence as the CEO override rerouted the aircraft back to the gate. But what came next shocked everyone. At exactly 9 a.m., American Royal Airlines headquarters in Dallas called an emergency press conference. The room was packed with reporters, their flashes relentless as the CEO podium sat ready. Only it wasn't Rebecca Simmons or any airline executive who stepped up to the microphone. It was Steve Harvey. He adjusted his cufflinks, leaned forward, and grinned that unmistakable grin that had lit up millions of living rooms. But this time there was no comedy in his tone. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice booming like a preacher's Sunday sermon, "last night you saw what happens when arrogance collides with accountability. But today I'm here to tell you something bigger. We ain't just fixin' one seat on one plane. We fixin' the whole system." Gasps rippled through the press room. Reporters scribbled frantically. "Starting today," Steve continued, "I am officially stepping in as chairman of American Royal Airlines. Not honorary, not symbolic, full authority. And the first order of business? Accountability from the top down." The crowd erupted. Questions flew like arrows. "Mr. Harvey, are you firing executives? Is Catherine Whitmore being banned from flights? What reforms are you planning to implement?" Steve raised a hand, calming the storm. His mustache twitched into a knowing smile. "See, y'all expect me to say I'm firing people, banning people, tearing the place down brick by brick, but here's the twist. I ain't gonna do that. I'm gonna do something they don't expect. I'm gonna show grace." The room froze. Even the most seasoned journalists blinked, unsure they'd heard him right. "Grace?" Steve nodded. "Listen, I could make Catherine Whitmore the face of shame. I could drag her through court, through headlines, through every talk show in America. But what's that gonna do? Embarrass her? Ruin her? That ain't justice. That's revenge. And revenge don't heal nothin'." He paused, letting the words breathe. "So here's what's really gonna happen. Catherine Whitmore is banned from flying American Royal until she completes 200 hours of community service at shelters, schools, and community centers across this country. And when she's done, she gonna come right back here and sit down with me for a public conversation about dignity, respect, and second chances. 'Cause if we ain't teaching, then we ain't changing." The press exploded. The twist hit like a thunderclap. Steve Harvey wasn't just demanding accountability, he was offering redemption. Back at JFK, where Catherine had spent the night hiding from reporters, the news broke like wildfire. Her phone buzzed endlessly. Some people jeered, mocking her fall from grace. Others, shockingly, praised Steve's decision. "Grace over vengeance," one tweet read. "Steve Harvey just turned an insult into a lesson. #second chance, trending now." Meanwhile, in neighborhoods across America, something started to shift. In barbershops in Atlanta, diners in Chicago, classrooms in Detroit, people weren't just talking about Catherine. They were talking about dignity, about the little ways everyday folks were told they didn't belong, about how one man's stand in 2A had become a mirror for the whole country. But the biggest twist hadn't landed yet, because as the press conference ended, a young woman in the back raised her hand timidly. She wasn't a reporter, not a politician, just a college student who had managed to sneak into the room. "Mr. Harvey?" she asked softly. "Why did you risk everything for this? You already had money. You already had fame. Why not just walk away and let it slide?" The cameras turned toward her. Steve leaned closer to the mic. His voice dropped low, filled with emotion. "Because I know what it's like to be told you don't belong. I've been told that since I was a kid on the streets of Cleveland. I've been told that when I was broke, sleeping in my car, dreaming of making people laugh. I've been told that in boardrooms, in Hollywood, even in church pews sometimes. And I promised myself, the day I got a seat at the table, I'd make damn sure nobody else got told to stand up and move. Not on my watch." The room fell silent. Reporters wiped their eyes. Cameramen swallowed hard. It was no longer a story about airlines or first-class seats. It was about every person who had ever been told they were less. The next morning, headlines didn't just call it the Flight 777 incident. They called it the seat that changed America. American Royal stock, instead of collapsing, surged to record highs. Customers praised the reforms, flocking to support the airline's new mission. And Catherine Whitmore? Against all odds, she accepted the challenge. Weeks later, videos surfaced of her serving food in Harlem, reading to kids in Southside Chicago, painting murals in Detroit. Each time, cameras caught her learning, listening, changing. And when she finally sat down across from Steve Harvey for that televised conversation, the world held its breath. She spoke with tears in her eyes. "I thought power was about money, seats, and status. But you showed me it's about respect, about dignity, about seeing people as people." Steve smiled, leaning back in his chair, his mustache twitching. "Now you finally get it. Took you long enough." The audience laughed, clapped, cried all at once. That night, millions tuned in, not to watch a fight, but to watch a redemption story unfold. Catherine's downfall became her rebirth. Steve's seat in 2A became a seat for every person who had ever been told they didn't belong. And in the end, the twist wasn't that Steve Harvey had grounded a plane. The twist was that he lifted a nation. Because sometimes the biggest power isn't in the punch. It's in the grace to let somebody stand back up. Weeks turned into months, but the echoes of Flight 777 never quieted. What began as a confrontation over one first-class seat became a defining story of dignity, grace, and accountability that reshaped not only an airline, but the way an entire nation thought about respect. Steve Harvey's bold stand in his orange suit had gone viral, replayed in millions of households. But the real story wasn't just the viral clip. It was the aftermath, the Catherine Whitmore redemption. Catherine Whitmore's fall from power had been swift. Overnight, she transformed from Manhattan's untouchable real estate mogul to the face of privilege exposed. Headlines crucified her. Talk shows mocked her. Protesters stood outside her penthouse chanting, "Seat 2A belongs to dignity, not arrogance." But because of Steve Harvey's decision, his twist of grace instead of revenge, her story didn't end there. Under the glare of cameras, Catherine traded designer coats for volunteer vests. She scrubbed soup kitchen counters in Harlem. She stacked books at underfunded libraries in Detroit. She tutored children in Los Angeles who giggled when they recognized her face from the news. At first, her hands trembled, her smiles looked forced. But slowly, something shifted. She listened. She learned. She started to understand the human cost of words like "you people." And when she sat across from Steve months later in a nationally televised special called The Conversation, she didn't look like the arrogant woman from 2A anymore. She looked like someone humbled and finally human. "Steve," she said, tears streaking down her cheeks, "you gave me the one thing I never gave anyone else, a second chance. You could have destroyed me. Instead, you forced me to face myself, and for that, I'm grateful." Steve leaned back, nodding. His mustache twitched into that familiar grin. "Took a long flight to get you there, but you finally landed." The audience roared with applause and laughter. Meanwhile, American Royal Airlines became a case study in transformation. The policies Steve had announced weren't empty promises. Every employee, from captains to baggage handlers, went through Harvey Global Dignity Training, a program built not on corporate jargon, but on real human lessons. They watched clips from the incident. They discussed respect, empathy, and accountability. The results were stunning. Complaints of discrimination plummeted. Customer satisfaction soared. For the first time in its history, American Royal Airlines became known not just for its planes, but for its principles. Other airlines noticed. Within a year, United, Delta, and even budget carriers scrambled to implement similar training. What began with one confrontation in 2A turned into an industry-wide reform. But Steve Harvey's message spread far beyond airports. Churches preached sermons about dignity, using his words as scripture. Schools built lesson plans around the seat that changed America. Activists held rallies, holding up signs that read, "Dignity flies first class." On social media, millions shared their own Seat 2A moments, stories of being overlooked, underestimated, disrespected, and how they found the courage to stand their ground. Steve didn't just change an airline, he lit a fire in everyday people who realized they had the right to dignity too. And then came the moment nobody expected. At a massive rally in Atlanta's Mercedes-Benz Stadium, where tens of thousands had gathered to celebrate the one-year anniversary of the Flight 777 incident, Steve Harvey took the stage. The arena was buzzing, cameras broadcasting live worldwide. Steve adjusted his mic, his orange suit gleaming under the stadium lights. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, "y'all know I didn't plan none of this. I didn't wake up one morning saying, I'm going to ground a plane today. But God don't always use plans. He uses moments. And this moment grew bigger than me, bigger than any one man." The crowd cheered, but Steve raised a hand. "And that's why tonight I'm announcing something new. I'm stepping down as chairman of American Royal Airlines." Gasps filled the arena. Reporters scrambled. Twitter nearly collapsed under the weight of shock. Steve smiled knowingly. "Don't worry, y'all. I ain't stepping back. I'm stepping forward. 'Cause if this fight is about dignity everywhere, then I can't just stop at airports. I gotta take this message to schools, to workplaces, to every corner of this country. So I'm launching the Seat 2A Foundation, dedicated to teaching respect, dignity, and second chances, no matter where you sit." The stadium erupted. People wept, shouted, threw their hands in the air like they were in church. Hashtags trended instantly. Hashtag Seat 2A Foundation. Months later, Steve boarded another American Royal flight. This time, no drama, no tension. As he walked down the aisle, passengers stood and clapped. The flight attendants smiled, their eyes glistening with gratitude. Even the captain left the cockpit to shake his hand. Steve settled into Seat 2A, but this time it wasn't just a seat, it was a symbol. He leaned back, closed his eyes, and whispered to himself, "This ain't just my seat anymore. It's everybody's." The engines roared, the plane lifted into the sky, and with it, so did a movement that had started with one man refusing to move and ended with millions learning to stand tall. Historians would later write about it. Documentaries would call it the flight that changed America. Politicians quoted it, preachers preached it, parents taught it. And in the end, Steve Harvey's legacy wasn't just laughter on a stage or questions on Family Feud or even investments in airlines. It was this: one orange suit, one boarding pass, one moment of courage. That became a movement of dignity. Because the world finally understood what Steve Harvey had always known. Respect isn't given by status. It's claimed by standing your ground. And when you stand with grace, you lift the whole world with you. If you like the Steve Harvey story, you can like this video and subscribe to this channel. It shows me that my time is worth it for you. And if you think anyone in your life would feel the same as you listening to this story, send this video to them to talk about this. Thank you for watching Brevenue.